Hello, YouTube. I'm going to do a little comment on a Stefan Molyneux video called Concepts and Morality, a Philosophical Introduction. And not only is it an introduction, it's a philosophical introduction. And concepts, morality, and philosophy are very themes, items that are very dear to me. Questions that need answering, and I appreciate that there are actually people out there on the internet trying to establish some sort of, let's say, non-governmental, non-gatekeeper, non-politically correct and taxation skewed kind of philosophy. And one of those few out there is actually, whether you like it, like Stefan Molyneux's approach and ideas and philosophy, or you don't, at least he's one of the few who actually put something out that is approachable. So it's about finding a balance between sort of academic philosophy and sort of mainstream pocket philosophy that might not be that good. So finding that balance somewhere in the middle where you can approach the topics and have some sort of being caught in the thinking without feeling that you are going complete out on a limb and the sort of philosopher is talking down to you as a peon who don't understand anything. I would say Stefan Molyneux is a good starting point for anyone who wants to, apart from me, of course, who wants to start thinking about things in a philosophical way. Though there are a few caveats you need to take that in recent times, he has ventured into politics, he has ventured into Christianity, or maybe religion, you should say, but Christianity, and sort of left the more pure philosophy in the wayside. And it seems now he's trying to get back into that mold or fold by starting making an introduction to concepts and morality. I think overall, and not to poison the well, but one of the reasons why I'm doing this comment is that I feel that it's unnecessarily word salad-like, his approach to explaining things. One of the things that is particular to philosophy is that it should be clear and concise. The end goal is precision and simplicity instead of artistic expression. Sort of philosophy is the alternative to any other kind of expression or description or thinking or expression, which could be called artful or sort of indirect manipulation of some kind, where philosophy tries to be, this is what I mean by this word, this is what I mean by this word, and this is what I mean by this word, and then the metaphysics and the epistemology and the ethics and so on. It's very precise, a meticulous way of organizing your thoughts. And one of the things that I'm in a little, I wouldn't say annoyed, but I would like it to be more precise. That he has spent an hour here in this show to explain concepts and comparing them to the status of the moral thinking in a sort of global standard. And it's a weird way of introducing people to concepts and morality. And another thing is that, what does he really mean, concept and morality? Is it about how concepts and morality interacts, or how concepts influences morality, or are they just two topics in the same podcast? There's a part that is concepts, and there's a part that's morality, and it's a philosophical introduction to both. It's not really that clear. I would say it's kind of the first, that it starts out with concepts and then sort of slides into talking about morality. And because people don't have the right, quote, understanding of concepts and how they work, they don't have and I may have misinterpreted what it says, and that's another point, that these parts of philosophy are very, very important to establish very precisely. You have to establish them very precisely. Now, I'm not certain I'm going to do that in a comment here. I would do that if I made that same kind of concepts of morality, a philosophical introduction. I would have made a PowerPoint and made a sort of a statements and definitions and so on, instead of sort of just word salad. It's not necessarily bad as such, but it's kind of, he's winging it, right? He's hey, I'll just grab the mic and then I'll start talking about concepts and morality. I have a loose idea where I'm going, but the subtitle, A Philosophical Introduction, that puts a certain necessary level of quality and rigidity and simplicity, and an approach that should be more like, this is an axiom 1, this is axiom 2, by this term I mean this, by that term I mean that, and so on, in my opinion. So I'm going to take it from the start and just sort of let it go, and then when Stefan Molyneux, or when I feel like, let me see if I can rearrange it a bit here. When I feel that I need to comment on it, I'll do that. So let's just head out and see what happens.
Everyone, it's the day after Christmas, the day of the sugar hangover, and the general healing of the mass paper cuts that come from opening presents. But actually, it's funny because we're not actually that much of a present family. We try to bring presents to each other every day with our joy. But yeah, there's not so much on Christmas Day. So an interesting discussion has been floating around concepts and truth and so on. So I thought I'd lay out a kind of framework. Now, that framework doesn't mean that it's the right way. It's just sort of a kickoff.
It's interesting, the combination of concepts and truth. That's important. I hope that he will get into more clear presentations and understandings of how concepts and truth are connected.
Discussion piece, I suppose, because actually my very first video was about concept formation. So it's something that I've been interested in for decades and decades, and I find really a completely fascinating topic. So I thought we could take it for
concept formation. Now I'm being picky, right? I'm tearing this apart or pulling it apart and trying to understand, because we're talking about a philosophical introduction. It's not just a loose discussion about things. This is a philosophical introduction. Now we need to be very precise, in my opinion, right? And what was it again? He said, no, I came out of
a kind of framework. Now, that framework doesn't mean that it's the right way. It's just sort of a kickoff discussion piece, I suppose. Because actually my very first...
So now it's a kickoff discussion piece. It's not a philosophical introduction. So already there, I'm getting a sort of mixed feelings about where he's going. He wanted to sound very serious, and now it's not very serious.
Video was about concept formation, so it's something that
concept formation. Now, are we talking about what is present and what should be there for concepts to form in the moment, or sort of a evolutionary or sort of life history about how concepts evolve presentation in somebody's mind. The formation or the information. The formation is how it appears, and the information is what is in it. What is in that formation, you could say, right? What does it mean to me, that concept? Are we talking about how it appears or how we understand it? So that's also a little loose in my opinion.
I've been interested in for decades and decades, and I find really a completely fascinating topic. So I thought we could take it for a spin and see if we can knock a few of these challenges out of the ballpark. Seems like a good plan. It's a nice way to spend a morning on Christmas, Boxing Day, I suppose. We'll unpack we'll unpack concepts on Boxing Day. Boom! There's your statutory dad joke for the start of your day. So concepts, oh man, they're the big thing that we have, right? They're the big, powerful mojo that we have. And if we can figure them out, I think we gain great traction in terms of, not just obviously truth, which is very important, but in
truth. Okay, so there's a direct relation between concept and truth. That I'm
the
interested.
virtue, which is even more important in many ways. So concepts, the first thing I always ask, I always think when I come across a philosophical concept, my approach is kind of like an anthropologist or an archaeologist. An archaeologist is probably the best way, which is you find some weird implement someplace. You just dig.
You find some weird implement. Is that a concept we're talking about now? Is the implement an interpretation of or how it forms? Now you're talking about experiencing concepts and not concept formation. Are you trying to explain the concept, or are you trying to philosophize about how concepts appear? I don't understand.
Digging around in usually the hills of Montana, it would seem, and you come across some strange Stone Age implement, right?
How do you know it's an implement? What is an implement? You have already analyzed what I suppose you think of as a concept. That object, whatever it is you have found in Montana, is an implement. So you have already analyzed the concept and you have sort of knowledge about it. How did you all of a sudden get from experiencing stuff to knowing that it's an implement? I can't understand that otherwise than you have knowledge that this object concept is an implement, and it's from Stone Age, which is an idea of what happened in the past. And how do you know that? How the hell do you know that? And why are we talking about knowledge before we have even established how concepts form? You were talking about concept formation.
And so your first question, I suppose, is, okay, well, what would this be used for? Let's say it's some curved hook.
What it would be used for? But that's an interpretation. That's an interpretation. Now you start to thinking about this concept that you have already identified. The concept is there. So you know that concept, whatever it is, but you know that what it is, right? You called it an implement. So it's an implement. Now you're starting to sort of thinking further and think what it could be used for this, it could be used for that. That's another thing. That has nothing to do with concept or concept formation. Now you're trying to establish some value that it has. Some actionable value that is let's call it a tool or something. If you go there and put it there and move it this way and move it that way, it would create some sort of value for you. But that's an interpretation. That is a rationalization based on reasoning, right? It has nothing to do with concepts or concept formation. or morality for that matter, but that may come in later.
Book.
And on my head, I'm already sort of feeling that it's all over the place. It has been going for 2 minutes, and we're sort of jumping from Montana to do. It's not. That's too much unnecessary fluff in what he calls a philosophical introduction. It needs to be clear what he's talking about. He's talking about, okay, I'm going to talk about this, and then this follows, and then this follows, and then this follows. Okay, part 1 is about this. Now I'm going to discuss this. And next part is this, and now I'm going to discuss this, and this leads to this, and this leads. He's sort of all over the place. And then it started concept formation, and then he talks about how to interpret a concept, and now it's an implement, and he didn't state how did he arrive at that interpretation of that concept. Maybe it's obvious, but explain why it's obvious. He doesn't do that.
Or I don't know, some corkscrew thing or whatever. You'd be like, in order to figure out what it is, you first have to figure out what its purpose is, because when human beings create things, they create things with intentionality, with the goal, of course, of trying to achieve some end, usually in a more efficient way.
But now you are interpreting a concept, as I said, you have already identified. And the title of the video is Concepts and Morality. Let's just keep morality on the back burner for now, and say, obviously you're starting with concepts, and then possibly morality will follow. But you're talking about concepts, not what the representation and interpretation of that concept could be useful for. Has nothing to do with the concept. You already identified it, right? How you judge what it can be used for is purely subjective. Well, one person might use it to cut a piece of bread. Someone else might think it's useful for cleaning their car, or whatever, right? I mean, it's not an objective approach to say, okay, I have to figure out what this is going to be used for. That could be an interesting philosophical discussion, but it's not about concepts or concept formation. You have already identified the concept, and now you're trying to explain what it can be used for. So you are going beyond what you are supposedly going to talk about.
So it's hard to run and grab a deer because they're pretty fast, and they kick. But if you get a spear or a bow and arrow, then you can.
So now you have identified a deer, a bow, a spear, an arrow. I suppose that those are concepts. How did you know that? You can't just say throw around objects or concepts and say they are just there. But if they are just there, why do you talk about concept formation? You have spent 40 years or whatever it was talking about concept formation. So why are you not talking about how those concepts form? You just mentioned them and then telling a story about it.
And kill the deer at a distance and then leisurely walk up and gorge yourself on its soon-to-be fried innards. So if you can't figure out the purpose of something, it's really hard to define what it is. Otherwise, you
define what it is. You said you identified an implement. You just identified it. It's an implement. I could go with you that you can say, okay, this object, whatever it is, cannot possibly, very unlikely, be made by a beaver or a firefly or a elephant or mammoth or whatever. But you have identified the object, right? You identified, you just did. That's why you are talking about it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking about it unless you had supposedly, as if you were in the real world, identified that concept. So why are you talking about, I need to figure out what this object is used for? That has nothing to do with concept formation. or how to understand what a concept is and what might not be a concept, right? Is time a concept? Is space a concept? Is blue a concept? Is morality a concept? Is philosophy a concept? All these things that we relate to, are they all concepts? Or are you just going to talk about some implement you found and how you can kill a deer with it? That seems like, okay, you want to take this mainstream and sort of lower the licks number of your statements in this video, but there's no rigidity to it, right? You're jumping around and losing, people are losing track of what you're doing. At the same time, it sounds like you're very knowledgeable and philosophical. So you might actually, if you're wrong about this, people are so confused about what you're saying that they say, that must be right. He's so wise. It's just me who's stupid. And I'm going to believe everything he says because he's so wise. And then if you're wrong, you are leading people on, right? So showing some rigidity and stepwise axiomatic approach to understanding this is necessary. You have to start from metaphysics and say, at this point, and I arrive at concepts, and in my experience, this is an example of a concept, this is an example of something that isn't a concept, if that is the case, and so on. You're just babbling out this story, and it's not a philosophical introduction, in my opinion. This is a fireside babbling, right?
You just have to say weird corkscrew thing or hooked thing, but once you can figure out, if you come across a scythe, then you would not really know what it was. And
you just said it was a scythe. Isn't that what this curved sort of knife, or you mow some hay or corn or crops, grass and so on? That's a scythe. You just said it's a scythe, and now you're saying I identified a scythe, but I don't know what it is. You just said I know what it is, and I don't know what it is. That's basically what you just said. I know what it is, and I have to figure out what it is. What the hell are you talking about?
Until you figured out what it was for. I mean, you'd know what it was in terms of a physical description, but that doesn't really help you that much. So if you...
scythe, if you say the word scythe to me, I have an idea of what this thing could be used for. It's sort of embedded in the language. I may be wrong. You may be wrong that it's a scythe. It might be something else. But you experience scythe, right? You don't need to go any further. You have identified the concept. It's a scythe, right? So why are you talking about you need to know what it is? You already know that.
If you figure out that the scythe is something that you use to cut down crops prior to machinery, then you say, okay, at least I know what this is as a whole. At least I know what this is for. And once you know what it's for, then you know what it is. So without a purpose.
No, you said, okay, so in your concept formation, you both get the sort of the conceptual understanding and then the functional understanding. Is that how it's supposed to be understood? Because the way you present it is like, it's a scythe, and then you need to understand what it is. But the whole concept of scythe has understanding of what it's going to be used for, embedded in the language or in the word. So why do you need to go any further? Right? It would be very stupid if you were sitting in the grass and some yard away you were hearing what you consider the sound of a tiger, and you were sitting there, okay, I know it's a tiger, or I experienced tiger, but now I have to figure out what it's used for, right? Those wouldn't be selected for in evolution. They would be eaten, right? So they are not here anymore, if they ever were there. So you have normally a very quick understanding of what things are, because otherwise you would be spending all day trying to figure out what you're experiencing. But that speed with which the concepts are formed and their inherent explanation or value or whatever you want to call it means possibly that some or a lot maybe of what you experience might actually not be there. You experience it, your mind fills out your experience because that's more important. Running from an imaginary tiger is better than not running from a tiger that is really there, right? So imagining things is more evolutionarily advantageous than distrusting what you experience. So
you can't really have a definition. So the first thing that I do when I look at something like concepts or truth is say, not what is it, but what is its.
Now we're talking about truth again. Would you mind telling us how concepts and truth are related? Would you mind telling us, because you are putting in a very important philosophical term called truth, and you're not explaining how they relate to the overall title of concepts. Introduce us to how you understand what truth is. Okay, maybe it comes later.
Its purpose, because you can't really design anything, or you can't really understand anything without understanding its purpose. I mean, if you find a box that shows
understanding is, you can't understand. I need to hear that again. Sorry, I'm just rewinding.
Like concepts or truth is say, not what is it, but what is its purpose? Because you can't really design anything, or you can't really understand anything without understanding its purpose. I mean,
I'm not sure I understand that. So what's the purpose of elephant? Elephant is a concept, right? If I experience elephant, do I need to, okay, I need to find out what the purpose of elephant is, or this particular elephant. What's the purpose? What is that? You just experience elephant. So what? You don't need to find out its purpose. If you was spending all day figuring out what the purpose of everything is in your experience, you would be sitting there, not getting out of your bed, right? Before it was evening and you have to go to bed again, because you would be sitting there figuring everything out. That's not how the mind works. It just experiences stuff. And some of it in your cognitive ability is selected as important from a sort of mental rationalized selection, that is important because that is valuable to me in some sense, right? But you don't try to explain everything else because you're going for that which is important. I'm not interested in finding out the purpose of elephant because I'm going to that oasis over there in my Jeep, right? So fuck the elephant, right? I don't need to figure out what it's there for to understand that it's an elephant. It's just a freaking elephant, right?
If you find a box that shows a map on a computer screen, you say, oh, okay, this is a GPS. Okay, so what is it?
But is this, there's a computer screen here, and now it's a little dark here, I'm sorry, but this is not what I call an iPad. Is this a GPS? There's a computer screen and find a map. Is it a GPS? How do you know if it is or if it isn't? Sometimes it's you're going into sort of figuring out what it's used for in order to understand how concepts form. That's a no-go, because concepts form whether you like it or not. You are not in control of what concepts appear in your experience. How you interpret them afterwards is interesting, absolutely, because that's a part of epistemology. But how they form is, as I understand it, what you're going for in this. And then why are you talking about how you understand the purpose of these objects? I simply don't understand why you're going that road.
I want something to display as a map. you don't really understand it until you know what its purpose is, which is its purpose is to humiliate you in front of your wife by constantly saying recalculating because you're too busy discussing philosophy to follow the traffic witch's directions from inside the magic box. So the question is, before what is concepts, what are concepts, what are the purpose? Or what is the purpose of concepts? And we're going to go singular, plural, pendulum here. What is the purpose of concepts? Very interesting question. So once we understand, I think, the concepts, I mean, obviously they're abstractions.
Purpose, is that not a subjective evaluation? A purpose is sort of a goal. Goals are human constructs in some way. The purpose of me sitting here is because I want to tell somebody what I think is good or bad about this video. But that's not something that is objective, right? It's not. It's an interpretation. If you're talking about concepts, we should be going for something that could be an objective standard in the end. If you need to go to morality, if there aren't any objective standard, there's no need to combine concepts and morality because they are disconnected. So if you're talking about your own interpretation of concepts, it doesn't matter in this particular connection between concepts and morality. We need to establish some sort of way to how to express what objectivity is, so we can agree on a moral principle that is applied to actions so they can be moral. But that objectivity has to be something that we can agree upon, but we can't agree upon your subjective interpretation of a concept.
And they are universalizations from particulars, right? Universalizations from particulars. So I'm currently pacing because that's how I do my best thinking. And every step I take, I assume massive amounts of things. When you break down these assumptions, and they're largely based on.
I need to stop it here. Universalization of particulars. So this is about concept formation. They are universalizations of particulars. Is he referring to when you see a horse, you see a particular horse, not horsiness or the concept horse? You experience a particular instance, as I think you would call it, of horse, and then the mind has derived previously in your mind's history, and maybe in a sort of evolutionary sense, a concept based on previous experiences that have been honed into identifying certain objects from sense data. So that when you experience horse, it's because you already have the idea of horse in you, and the mind says, I'm going to place a horse in this experience because that's what my combinations of sense data tells me is there. So you are implicitly saying that concepts are built through a lifetime, maybe from birth, and even from before birth, a bit like Plato, that they may arrive with the genetics, or genetically you are what's the word, disposed for, not disposed, you have a certain ability to create. Maybe you have a blank slate, but at least you have a slate, and the slate is useful for placing concepts on. So that slate is what you're born with, and that slate is sort of, in a Socratic, the way of Socrates would say it, is a kind of wax that where certain combinations of sense data is activating concepts that are kept in sort of a concept memory, And when you go around in your later years, these concepts will trigger all sorts of different experiences of those particular concepts, but they will have attached present day sense data attributes like color and shape and smell and so on, because that's the present experience that these concepts, at least this is how I understand what you're trying to say, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I hear when you say that they are sort of derived from their generalizations of certain patterns. But how, if you say that I'm experiencing the horse, that particular horse, how do you know that there is a particular unique instance of a horse if you only have the concept in your mind? And what's the limitations of when you won't experience that? How do you know if you should experience that, whatever it is? What was it? I forget what you referred to. Let's say an elephant. You experience elephant. How do you know? How can you check whether or not you should experience that elephant? Right? How do you know? You have the present experience of elephant, but that's just your concept with added present in the moment attributes that are unique combinations, and therefore this is an instance of that concept. How do you know you should? How do you know that your mind didn't present that in a faulty manner? That it thought it was sort of, it had the right combination of, but it wasn't there really. How do you know? Are you going to say that if I experience something, it must exist there? Because you have no way of proving that. You have no way of controlling or checking whether or not what you experience is actually something you should be experiencing, because you only have that experience. So it should get quite interesting now.
Concepts. So every time I take a step, I assume that there's going to be gravity. I assume that the atoms of my foot are not going to magically pass through the atoms of the floor. I assume just a massive numbers of things that...
Your assumptions are not concepts. They are some sort of memory of experiences, but those are not... They may be based on kind of memory of concepts that were active at a previous time, but you having assumptions about what you're going to experience in the near future cannot possibly be true concepts, because it's in the future. You're just taking the chance based on one you have previously experienced that this car is going to drive me where I want it to and not explode or something, right? Or drive through disappear in the middle of whatever. But that's not knowledge. That's not a concept. Now you're talking about how you experience, how you expect things to be present or behave in the future. What does that have to do with concept formation? That is only in the now.
That are generally universal. We don't drive to another city and say, well, I don't know if gravity is going to be operating there, right? So we have a concept called gravity or weight.
Wait a minute. Now gravity is a concept? I don't think so. Gravity is an explanation, a scientific explanation of certain behaviors of concepts. That then when you bring, when certain concepts are present in the universe, let's say in your experience, and this is the case and this is the case, then science will have Newton's laws will tell you this is probably what is going to happen. This is what is going to happen. It's not probably, it says this is what is going to happen, but you don't know that before you experience it. Right? And gravity is not a concept. A concept is something that can have at least one of 5 sensual datas. It should have a color, it should have a smell, or it should have a smell, or it should have a feel, or it should have a sound, or it should have a taste. If it doesn't have any of those, it cannot be a freaking concept, because you can't sense it. That a combination of concepts that behaves in a certain way can be explained with some physics is one thing, but it doesn't explain the concepts, right? Gravity is an additional layer that your mind has put into your experience to predict the future. It actually has nothing to do with morality. This is a very, very important insight you need to think more about. Gravity is not a concept. Maybe you want to call everything you experience a concept, but then it loses its importance. You need to distinguish between what is actually concept and what is actually not concept. What about distinguishing between those objects that can be sensed using at least one of the 5 sensual datas and those who can't? Huh? And if you do that, gravity is not a concept, because you can't sense gravity.
Resistance, which is that atoms don't pass through other atoms, even though, one of these tricky things, like there's so much space between atoms, it's like galaxies colliding, just kind of pass through each other. But of course, I think it's...
How do you know that? Have you seen particles pass through each other like galaxies? Have you seen that? Or have you just read about it in a book, or someone has told you about it? Well, is that a concept that you have experienced? Or are you just trusting that somebody else is telling you about this concept that is so small that nobody can experience it? So it's fireside babble.
It's the strong forces or the weak forces. I think the strong forces that prevent atoms from passing through each other. So we have these concepts, and the individual instances that we have, which is every time I take a step in my entire life, 54 years plus, every time I take a step, the same thing happens. My foot doesn't go through the floor, and gravity operates.
Just because it hasn't happened before doesn't mean it cannot or will happen in the future. You cannot know about the future. It's fine that you rationalize and say, I'm going to take the chance, quote, that my bicycle is not going to explode, right? Or that when I go to that place, there will be food that I can exchange some stuff with and but you don't know it before you experience it, right? This is central. Concepts and truth and knowledge hangs together. And why don't you explain that before you start talking about that you are going to take the chance that gravity is going to pull you to the ground in a few seconds or tomorrow or in a week from now? That has nothing to do with concepts and or morality.
So there's resistance and there's weight. That is the basics of it, right? So
I need to take that again.
Called gravity or weight. We have a concept called resistance, which is that atom.
Gravity or weight? No. There are two different things. Gravity is not a thing, right? It's an explanation of how things might happen in the future based on what previously is remembered as happening and how things are in the now. It's a sort of a crystal ball, right? Gravity is not something you can measure or directly. You can say, okay, if I have a weight or a what's it called, a cannonball or something, and put it on this mechanism, and these numbers will show something, and I will call it a measurement of the weight. but that's just an transposing what is happening into a artificially created system. You're not really measuring gravity because you can't. It's an explanation of something. It's not something that's there. You can't sense it. So you're just creating a sort of quantification, or sort of what is it? Qualification, quantification. It must be right about what is going on. But weight and gravity is not the same. Weight is the force. Just if you're sticking to physics, Newtonian physics, weight is the force an object presses on another object. That's the weight. If you put something on your hand, the weight is the force with which it presses on your hand. That's the weight. That's not gravity. The force is the product of the mass of the object and the gravitational acceleration. That is a constant, that sort of variable constant, but depends on how far you are from the center of that object that creates the gravity in space. Gravity is actually space trying to pull things to the center of the biggest object in the sort of gravitational field. That's Einstein's idea of gravity is space that has been distorted and then tries to work the opposite way to press back into a more stable form, that is where there's no mass present in space. But that pressure, let's call it that space puts on that object makes smaller objects in the vicinity sort of look like they are attracted to, like if you drop a stone in the air, it will fall down to earth. But that's because Earth creates a very big distortion in space, and that distortion presses the stone down to Earth, or tries to actually press it down to the center of Earth. But that's another story. But because of the strong nuclear forces in the Earth's soil, it will stay there, right?
Atoms don't pass through other atoms, even though, one of these tricky things, like there's so much space between atoms, it's like galaxies colliding, just kind of pass through each other. But of course, I think it's the strong forces or the weak forces. I think the strong forces that prevent atoms from passing through each other. So we have these concepts, and the individual instances that we have, which is every time I take a step in my entire life, 54 years plus, every time I take a step, the same thing happens. My foot doesn't go through the floor, and gravity operates. Right? So there's resistance and there's weight. That is the basics of it, right? So the concept is something which we use not for the past, but for the future. So if I lived in some insane schizophrenic universe where gravity reversed while my feet sometimes went through the floor, some nightmare Salvador Dali painting or something like that, then I would only be tempted to make concepts in order to self-abuse myself with delusions of consistency, which would result in actual inconsistency. And my foot would sometimes go through the floor, sometimes I would float up.
Now you're talking about how these concepts, let's say, behave in the world and how you trust them to behave in a certain way in the future. It's an interesting discussion, but it's not what you are. You're trying to make a philosophical introduction to concepts in combination with morality, I suppose. So why are you talking about what you think is going to happen in the future? I don't understand this. It seems to me like you don't really know what you're talking about, to be a little harsh, or you haven't given it sufficient thought and rigidity to make sure that you're not just talking left and right and making it sound like you know something.
And this is one of the reasons we know we're dreaming rather than being awake, is that lack of consistency, and concepts don't apply really in dreams because they're trying to get at emotional truth, which is often contradictory rather than a physical truth, which tends to be empirical and scientific.
Now we're talking about truth. an emotional truth and a physical truth. So now we are in dream analysis, and dreams are sort of disconnected or whatever you want to call it, and reality is connected in another way that is, I suppose you think, is more coherent or stable or something like that, and that one thing leads to another, and that's how it always is. But now you're talking about truth again. Why are you talking about truth? I thought we were talking about concepts. Why don't you tell us what you mean by truth in connection with concepts?
So concepts are really around prediction. What are they for? Well, you don't build a scythe for last year's harvest, right? You don't build a spear for
No. But why do you keep talking about this? You should talk about how concepts appear and metaphysics. Why are you talking about what the scythe should be used for? Who gives a fucking crap, to be honest, right? You can use it to cut your beard if you want. You can use it to, make an omelette, maybe even, right? I don't know, but you can use it for anything you want, or possibly not very rationally, maybe not very efficiently. But there's nothing that explains what concepts are when you have already identified the concept. You have said it's a scythe. Finished, done. It's there. You identified it. How you're going to use it is another completely different matter. How did you know that it was a scythe? How did that arrive? Where did that come from? How do you know you're supposed to experience that? That's the interesting questions, huh?
Months. Hunt, you build a spear for the future. You build a spear or a scythe with the anticipation of achieving something through that tool in the future. So if we look at concepts and we say, okay, we kind of know what they are. They're abstractions, universalized abstractions from individual empirical experiences.
Yes, over time. Because you have to have something in your baggage that you bring along to your everyday experience or your present experience in order to ignite some concept. It must be some sort of, as you say, universalized concept. But where did that come from? Did it appear in childhood? Did it appear yesterday? Or did the mind just make it on the fly when you experience something? And how did the mind know that it was supposed to create that concept there in the moment? These are the interesting questions, not whether or not you can figure out how to use a scythe, because you already, as I said, you identified it. And that's the important question.
Then we have a sense, we can then ask what they're for. And what they're for has to have something to do with survival. And we know that because although,
when you experience elephant, does that have something to do with survival? Or are you saying an elephant is not a concept? Why don't you explain this more deeply? Because this is going in a completely weird direction. I mean, it's like you have to experience something and then you have to sit down and think about it and what it can be used for. And all it can be used for is something that is furthering life. That may be true in many situations. But if I experience a cloud, does that have something to do with my survival? It may basically deep down that everything you experience appeared because that thing or that ability to make that appear was a necessary appearance that to further that life in the past that eventually turns out to me experiencing that cloud. But when you experience cloud in the now, why do you have to figure out whether or not this, or figure out if it furthers your life? What if you think it doesn't further my life? Will the cloud disappear then? Or are you just supposed to say, okay, this is not interesting for me now, that cloud? But you don't say that. It's like everything needs to be furthering your evolutionary survival mechanism. And I agree to some extent to that, but you don't say that. It's like you're saying that everything you experience, because you haven't said that some part of your experience are not concepts. It's like everything are concepts that you experience, like gravity and feelings and dreams and whatever. Everything is concepts, no matter what. Even if you don't have sense data, which was the case, or which is the case with gravity, you don't experience gravity. So how the hell can it be a concept? So is it an artificial concept? So now we are talking about experience concept and artificial concept. Are the artificial concepts sort of a priori knowledge, or you bring to the table, and how does this work?
There's the instance, there's the concept, and then there's the concept about the concept, or you could say the meta concept. And I'm sorry to be annoying, but it'll be pretty clear if you use this language what I'm talking about. So we have individual weight, right? You pick up a ball, you drop it, it falls to the ground. That's your individual instance, right? That's not a concept. That's just, it's a fact. It's a thing that happens. The concept is, okay, everything has weight and everything falls to the ground. That's the concept.
Sorry,
but
there was a little
we share that with the
mishap
animals.
in the sharing.
You throw a ball in the dark and
window,
figure out where
so I hope
the ball is going to land and can
talking
predict.
about something that I don't find that is that important. How balls behave. The concept is the ball, not the behavior. You can't put behaviors or a scientific description of how concepts behave under certain circumstances, and then pile it together with the concepts themselves. That's like, well, I don't know, like saying that petrol is the same as a car.
Every particular instance of what has happened before, but because you're building things empirically, it's pretty tough to apply these concepts to new, completely untested experiences. So we have the instance or the experience, we have the concept, which is weight, and then we have the meta concept, which is there is a property called gravity, which is common to all things. We can measure it, we can understand it mathematically, we can predict it to such a degree that we can send a probe from here and have it go past Jupiter some months or years from now.
I don't know where he's going with this. I mean, it has nothing to do with concepts or concept formation, that you can predict how concepts will behave in a gravitational field or something like that. It has nothing to do with the concepts themselves. Are you trying to bridge some way between concepts and morality? But when you call gravity a concept, you are wrong. It's incorrect. I must, draw the conclusion that you don't know what you're talking about. Gravity is not a concept. It may be, you could call it an idea, but now we are talking about experience. Now we are talking about epistemology and knowledge and truth and these things. We are not talking about, I have an idea about how things behave in the world if you're going to shove some dish to Mars or whatever. That's not a concept. That idea or that imagination of how things could behave in the future, that is not a concept. And if you call that a concept, you are equivocating different kinds of mental things to be the same thing. So you're confusing what we're talking about, right? As I said, you can't experience gravity. It's a conventional way of explaining the future in a sort of scientific way, right?
So everything that is alive experiences the instance, right? I mean, even single-celled organisms will try to reproduce and will eat and all of that, right? So they have that empirical understanding of their immediate environment.
How do you know that? Do you have access to bacteria's inner experience? How do you know that? Are you in directly connection with the inner experience of bacteria? I suppose you aren't. So how do you know that? You are just guessing. now. You're guessing that. You're saying, okay, I'm going to go with this and I'm going to pretend that it's knowledge, and I'm going to sort of compare it to concepts, or that they are also experiencing concepts. You don't know that. In fact, everything that I know is that I experience what I could call concepts. You're just one of my concepts on my computer screen, right? Or a representation of a concept, a YouTuber. I'm not experiencing Stefan Molyneux. If Stefan Molyneux is something that is similar to myself, just on the other side of the globe, so I'm not experiencing you, right? I'm experiencing a representation of something called Stefan Molyneux, but you're just a concept in my mind. Everything I have are concepts in my mind, and they may be some additional stuff, but how can I explain those concepts as also having an imagination or a experience, and saying that they experience the same kind of concept, or at least they experience concepts like I do, because they're only concepts in my experience. So now I'm giving experience to my experience. That is a very big bridge, a bridge too far, maybe, right?
That's what the every organism does. The higher organisms can do more predictive stuff. So rather than just waiting for a food source to impinge upon your senses, as a hyena or jackal, you can go out and hunt for the food and try and find it, rather than just waiting for it to show up in your lair or whatever, right? And you have to have concepts in order to do that. You have to have a differentiator between, creatures that are bigger than you and dangerous to you versus creatures that are smaller to you and or not dangerous to you that you can attack and eat and so on, right? But only human beings have the meta concepts, which is the abstraction of the concept away from immediate sense data, away from empirical experience.
Abstraction, are we talking in the now or in the past? If they are abstractions from them, do you experience elephant and then extract elephant from it when you experience that instance? Or was that generalization or universalization of previous elephants that which made you able to experience that elephant in the now, even if it's a specific instance of that elephant, of an elephant? It's like you are saying, I am extracting elephant from my experience, but you had the experience of the elephant in the first place. Otherwise, you couldn't extract elephant from it, right? So are you saying that which I don't know what it is, I will extract elephant from that? Because if you say that's an elephant and I'm going to extract elephant, why do you need to extract it if you already know that it's an elephant? What's that extraction thing you're doing? So you must know already, you must have, like Plato says, maybe he's a bit funky with his conclusions, but that you have a prior understanding of what elephant is in order to experience elephant in the now. There must be something that makes your cognitive abilities able to pinpoint elephant. And your mind does not ask another part of your mind to say, okay, please tell me if this is an elephant now or it isn't. It experiences elephant. And I'm sorry for using elephant because it's just an example, right? It doesn't know if it should experience elephant. You can rationalize later whether or not you think you should be experiencing that elephant or you shouldn't be experiencing that elephant, but that doesn't change whether or not you experience elephant. And there's nothing that in that experience itself that tells you whether or not you should experience it. So there's no direct way to say, even if you can extract something from it, that you should experience it. That disables the importance of extracting something from it, because you cannot tell whether or not you should experience it, right? So you need to handle these kinds of questions before you just cycle ahead and say, now I'm going to, explain what is going to happen in the future.
So that the concept can be applied to things that we've never experienced. Right? I mean, that's really, I always sort of wonder what happens, like, so, you have a dog, right? And the dogs love to play throw catch with the ball. Yet, if you take a ball and you just put it in front of a puppy, the puppy may try to eat it, but it's not particularly excited by it because it doesn't have the association of great fun and play.
Fun are subjective measurements or things. They are not objective. They are not sensory data. It's not that object is fun, therefore it's an elephant, right? That is scary, therefore it's a tiger. That's not how it works, right? It's not your internal emotional apparatus. That may be as valid for truth and knowledge as anything, but they are not what establishes a concept. Your emotions are what is derived from concepts, in my opinion, right? When you experience tiger, you will probably experience a lot of emotional stuff, right? Adrenaline and so on to get flight or fight a mechanism, right? But those come after the initiation of the concept tiger, when you're sitting there in the bush. So how can your emotions come before the creation of the concept? It can't, because it's the concepts that creates your emotions.
And so on, right? It's the same thing with a leash. Dogs often don't like leashes, unless, of course, the leash leads them to go and play in a dog park, which they love. So you bring the leash out and the dog gets very excited. Or the word walk, right? Dogs will understand the word walk to know that it is going to be a fun thing. You can go for a walk, stretch your legs. But puppies, if you say the word walk to puppies, they have no idea what you're talking about. They don't care, right? So dogs do have this association of the word to the action, or the object to the action. The word walk or the object ball, or it could be frisbee that you throw, or a stick even, right?
Yeah, those are learned stuff that they connect a certain sensory data with a certain outcome that has to do with now when my master sharpens the knife, it means that there are probably chicken meat on in the very near future, and I'm going to rub myself against his leg until it gives me some chicken meat, right? These are direct connections that are learned, but it's the sensory data. It's the sensory data that is directly connected with a certain conceptual outcome. It's not a concept that triggers an idea or an emotion. It's the sensory stuff, that the sound of the knife or the calling of the dogs to go for a walk, certain sound that it connects to with a certain even emotional state, right? That it prefers compared to what it is in now. There's no, it's always sensory things, right? That is connected with it. But if I say chicken meat to a dog, it's not because it understands it's chicken meat. It's because it knows this sound means that thing that tastes this way, which I would call chicken meat, right? So be careful not to confuse conceptual or concept creation with direct sensory to emotional states, right?
So, and you can actually see there's sort of funny videos of dogs online, and somebody has set up a mannequin, and the dog will take a ball and drop it in the lap of a mannequin, because you drop the ball where the human being is, and the human being will throw the ball in their experience. And the dogs, of course, get quite confused, right? Because it's not playing out the way that it should. So dogs will begin to associate that. And I remember a friend of mine had a pond when we were growing up, and he said, "Oh, it's 4:00. We got to go feed the fish, right?" And is this their dining hour? He's like, no, but if you go at a particular time of day to the edge of the pond, then the fish will gather in anticipation. They'll know they'll be there already because they've associated that time of day with feeding, and they kind of got it imprinted in there. But they're not going to complain that you're late if you show up at 4:30 or whatever, right? So animals will develop concepts.
You don't know what animals. You don't know anything but your own experience. You don't know anything except your own experience. Why are you telling me about? Right? I'm talking to the screen. I'm going to take the chance. I'm making the assumption or the axiom that you are actually a person like myself, having experience like I am. That's an implicit assumption I'm making talking to this screen. But now you are telling me, as if I was saying to you, I know how an animal, a third party that none of us has access to. We don't even have access to anything but our own experience, but I certainly do not have access to how animal experience or what they experience or what it's like to be a bat or anything like that, right?
In that they can use to predict immediate sense experience into the future, right? Zebras don't sort of sit there and say, well, that lion could be a vegetarian or that lion could not be hungry. One is possible, one is not, but it's too much of a risk either way, right? So they assume that all the zebras are safe and all the lions are dangerous, right? Based upon instincts and prior chasing. And, there's also funny videos online where a dog is eating some food and someone will come up with a pretend dog, will have the dog, like a stuffed dog. They will have the stuffed dog pretend to eat the food and then fall over dead. And then the dog will spit out its food because it says, oh my gosh, this food killed that dog. I don't want to eat it anymore. So there is processing.
So sort of a reverse Pavlovian thing. Okay.
Of abstractions. The word walk, the ball. No, the dog doesn't care about the ball. The dog cares about the throwing and the chasing and the catching and the returning and all that. So animals will work with concepts, but they cannot abstract the concept to entirely new situations. Human beings can't.
No, what you mean is they can imagine. You are proposing or you are claiming that all other animals, as I understand it, than human beings, cannot imagine a future using the universal concept or the meta concept or whatever you called it, to imagine how the future could be. So that may be the case. I mean, I've seen a video of dolphins. They were circling around a shoal of fish, and they would, with the tails, they will with their, I guess, the back end of a dolphin, they call it the tail, but I'm not actually sure, but never mind, that they would encompass the whole shoal of fish with their tail, and then they will disturb the sea floor, and the sand would be kicked up and make the water not invisible. What's it called? Non-transparent. So the fish they wouldn't go through that sort of circle, a wall of sand, and then the dolphins would sort of in a spiral move closer and closer and closer to this shoal. And when they got so close that the shoal of fish felt that they were sort of trapped, the fish would sort of jump out of this encircling of sand. And then the dolphins outside the circle would just wait there with their mouths open, and the fish would just fall down their throat and they would eat them. Now, that takes a bit of imagination. How can you not imagine something. You must have had some idea of sort of circles or fish flying, or I'm not sure, but it's up for discussion at least, right?
Yeah, right.
Me.
I mean, the first time you sail across an ocean, well, nobody's ever done that before, right? So
how do you know nobody's done it before? How do you know it's the first time? Yeah, if it's the first time, nobody has done it before, but how do you know it's the first time? Who were the first to cross the Atlantic Ocean? Was it Columbus? Was it some Irishmen in a boat? Were it some Vikings coming from Greenland? Who were the first? Or were there some Ice Age people walking on the ice across the Atlantic? Because there was a huge ice cap in the northern hemisphere that they could walk actually across on the ice. They could. Who were the first? How do you know who the first is? It's bullshit. You don't know that. You don't know the whole world, right? You don't know what everybody has done everywhere at all times. And you don't even know what people are doing now. There may be somebody doing the same thing you're doing, and winning the competition by 2 seconds, and then you lost. You may not be the first one, right? So these things are.
So you're taking your abstractions and navigation, using your sextant, and a rude word for kids, but I managed to survive it. And you take your abstractions, you can apply them to entirely new situations. And that's called progress, right? That's called progress.
No, because what you imagine may not be progressive, or may not be, you can imagine a whole lot of things, but they may not progress or be useful, or what you think furthers your life may actually be bad for you, right? So it's not progress. Imagination doesn't equal progress, but you need to have some sort of imagination of some kind, I guess, in order to create something you could call progress, but it doesn't follow automatically.
And this is sort of what I'm talking about, the morality of things, right? So universally preferable behavior is take.
So every time you talk about morality, you immediately switch over to talk about universally preferable behavior. I'm a bit tired of this. I'm just going to say universally preferable behavior, and they're going through these steps that if you argue with me, you can't, and so on, and therefore I'm right. Why don't you put this term universally preferable behavior on the back burner for a few years and just talk about morality without referring? And for some reason, it might be that there are a few things that needs to be looked at in this UPB. So why don't you put it aside for a while and then just talk morality instead of UPB also?
Taking the morals that we all accept when we're little and we all accept in our personal lives, which is really, it's kind of an animal situation, right?
How do you know what we all accept? How do you know? Man, you haven't even established knowledge, and now you're spurting out knowledge as if you know what everybody does or thinks, and it's ridiculous. Come on, man.
It's an animal situation where we say, well, the morals are just, I don't like being stolen from, I don't like being hit, I don't like any of that stuff, so I'm going to say that stuff's bad, and so on, right? That's really like a dog with a ball. Well, the immediate experience of this is being good and all that, right? So I anticipate that the future experience will be good. It's very sense-based, and it's not human. The way that we work with ethics is not human. It is at an animal levels of immediacy and experience. Now, of course, the process of science is to take immediate sense data and extrapolate it to the universal.
No, it's taking what you have experienced in the past, confirming with present sense data, or concepts more precisely, and how they act between each other, and predicting that the same scenario will be the same in the future. But that jump into the future is just your you're taking the chance. You have no idea. You have no way of knowing what is happening in the future. Yes, it keeps happening the same. It has done that for thousands of years, maybe, but that doesn't mean that it must happen in the future. But it's a very good bet. I agree. I'm going to make sure that when I eat an apple tomorrow, it will be the same, have the same function, and do the same thing for me as it did today or yesterday or 2 years ago. But I can't know that before it happens. It's not because I can't have an idea about it, but knowledge, which you haven't even defined or approached in this video yet, but you're just talking about as if you know it and everybody knows it. Knowledge is not possible about either the future or the past, because it's only in the now that there's sense data. And you have just said that, because it's sense data. You have to have sense data to have concepts, and you have to have concepts for things to be true, and you have to have truth in order to know, or something like that at least, right? And that can only happen in now. That you want to take the chance that your car is going to bring you to Las Vegas or whatever, that's your judgment. It's not knowledge. It's not knowledge, because it hasn't happened yet. So you can't have sense data about it, so you can't know it, right?
And through that, we surmount the limitations of our sense data, right? The example, of course, obvious one being that the world looks flat, but it is in fact round. So we take our immediate sense data and we universalize it. Everything.
1 second, I have to rewind a bit.
Take your abstractions, you can apply them to entirely new situations.
That's imagination.
And that's called progress, right?
No, it's called imagination.
That's called progress. And this is sort of what I'm talking about, the morality of things, right? So universally preferable behavior is taking the morals that we all accept when we're little and we all accept in our personal lives, which is really, it's kind of an...
But just because people accept something doesn't mean that it's correct philosophy. Because just because children are told not to steal or just hit or whatever, doesn't mean that it's right. Yeah, the parents or the children haven't done any philosophy or ethics to figure out whether or not those principles that they spurred are correct or not. So that there's no good philosophy to back up the idea that because you're told something when you're a child, you should transpose it or move it into the future, and everybody should do the same as when you're children. How do you know that that is correct? You haven't. You haven't done an explanation of why those that you say that we all accept when we are children. Yeah, that we have no choice. We are not developed yet, or we are not, because parents say so. And if you don't obey the parents, we might get early to bed, or we may not get to play the PlayStation, or we get no candy on Fridays, or whatever, right? So they just obey. But that doesn't make it right, because everybody's told that, right? Bad philosophy.
Animal situation, right? It's an animal situation where we say, well, the morals are just, I don't like being stolen from, I don't like being hit, I don't like any of that stuff. So I'm going to say that stuff's bad, and so on, right? That's really like a dog with a ball. Well, the immediate experience of this has been good and all that, right? So I anticipate that the future experience will be good. It's very sense-based, and it's not human. The way that we work with ethics is not human. It is at an animal levels of immediacy and experience. Now, of course, the process of science.
I think what you're getting at is some sort of segue into sort of politics and social justice, and it is bad for the rabbits. They should have somebody taking care of them. The prime minister should make a law that forbids people to, because I don't like that the rabbits are whatever, something like that. I can understand what you're going with that, but that's a big jump suddenly to go into things like that. And all the things you didn't explain about concepts, it's as if you just say, oh, I experienced that, and that's a concept done. Now I'm going to talk about the future, and I'm going to make a parallel between how people understand morality in the now, as if it was a concept in the now, I suppose. And then that's bad because that's not in the long, eudaimonia way of doing things. I suppose that's what it's going for. I'm confused.
Science is to take immediate sense data and extrapolate it to the universal. And through that, we cement.
Okay, so I experience elephant. How do I extrapolate that to the universal? Is that, okay, I experience elephant, therefore elephants can exist and will exist for all eternity and have existed for all eternity. Even if I don't experience them, they must exist somewhere. Is that the kind of thing you're going for? It's too, there are too many words and too little philosophy in it. And you're equivocating terms and left and right and becoming political and sort of, and say because all children are treated this way, you just transpose it to adulthood, and then we have morality or anything like that. Okay, there might be a way to start off with a universal morality to stay within your terms, but that's not philosophy. That's pragmatism or something like that, right? It's not philosophy. Philosophy or ethics is thinking about how did you arrive at that definition of what you should or shouldn't do. How did you arrive at that? It's not what you arrived at, it's how you arrived at it, right? If I present a principle to you, what you are interested in, how did I get to that principle? How did I get there? That's what ethics is about. Ethics is about, okay, I have this metaphysics, I have these concepts, I have this knowledge, I have this objectivity, and therefore I must arrive at this ethics and principles or whatever. That's what you're interested in. That is the philosophy. Your mommy telling you not to hit other children is not philosophy, right? It is not philosophy.
Down to the limitations of our sense data, right? The example, of course, obvious one being that the world looks flat, but it is in fact round.
What? The Earth looks flat, but it is actually round. In fact, round. A fact, is that knowledge, or is it a concept? So when you have Earth, is that a concept? Or is roundness a concept? And how do you know? Because if you don't experience the shape of the Earth at the moment you are talking, you may be sitting in some sort of vehicle where you can see the whole shape, the complete shape of Earth, and say to yourself, yes, the Earth has this shape. But unless you're doing that, you are just saying, I believe the Earth has this shape. I'm not personally saying anything. The only thing I can say from where I'm sitting, I don't know what shape Earth has. Right? That's what the good philosophers usually or very often say when people ask them something, they say, I don't know. Because my sense data is very limited from where I'm sitting. There's nothing, not really anything interesting that I can say that I know at the moment, because I don't have the sense data. I don't know what shape the Earth is. I may have an idea. There may be conjectures or evidence that points in a certain direction. And if I should take the chance at the moment and state what shape it is, I would say that it's spheric or round, you may say. But I don't know that. I don't know that. Please understand the difference between having an imagination or having a reasoning based on evidence that points in a certain direction is not the same as having knowledge. Knowledge needs sense data. You don't have, unless you're sitting in some vehicle in a sort of specific distance from Earth, suppose that it's spheric and round, you need to be there to say the proposition the Earth is round to me is true. If you ask me now, what shape is Earth? And Earth is what, if you are referring to this thing I'm sitting on at the moment, I will have to say, I don't know. if I have to be correct philosophically correct about what is true. And you can even discuss, can a shape be knowledge? Or is it a sort of a kind of an attribute of things? Is a shape knowledge? Because there are lots of things that can be round. But there's only one thing that can be earth, right? It's either earth or it's not earth, right? But all sorts of things can be round, in my opinion, right? So it's interesting to figure out what exactly knowledge is, if that's what you're going for with the concepts.
So we take our immediate sense data and we universalize it. Everything that we see, the planets, the moon, the sun, it's all round. So, it raises the light.
Yeah, the moon is round. How do you know? Well, every 4 weeks, you can go outside and look at the moon. That's why there's no flat moon society or flat moon conspiracists, because people can say, go out and look. But you can't look at the earth because it's so huge, apparently, and you're standing on it. You're not in the right place to see what shape it is. Huh? I love these flat earthers because they challenge the idea of knowledge. People claim, the earth is round. They don't know that. They just heard it. They have told some stories about Eratosthenes placing a stick in Egypt, Alexandria, and when you see the horizon, it must be this and must be that. That's a different thing. That is something that is hypothetical and bringing evidence to the fore that points in a certain direction, so that if you're going to take the chance on what shape it is, you will have a qualified statement about what it is. But you don't know that. Knowledge is a different kind of thing. You have to experience it to be knowledge. Done.
Likelihood that the Earth will be round. Once we got a sense of how the solar system was formed, that you had these giant bands of matter surrounding the Earth, surrounding the sun, which then over time, they.
You don't know that. You don't have knowledge. It's a conjecture. It's a hypothesis. It's a theory of what happened in the past. You can't know what happened in the past. It's a different kind of thing. Knowledge can only be in the now. It can be whether I experience elephant. That's knowledge. I have an idea what happened 13 billion years ago is not knowledge. It's a different kind of thing. You're not experiencing it. It's a description. It's a convention. It's a science, whatever. It's not knowledge.
Bumped into each other, they got bigger and bigger, and as they got bigger, they attracted more. You ended up with these clumps of matter called planets. Once you understand that, then you understand that in a void, in a
I'm going to skip ahead a bit.
If the universe was created by a conscious entity, so how much? That's an interesting question, right? At what point do you say, okay, that's more than a coincidence, this must be man-made, right? So, we see trees broken all the time, particularly here in Canada, right? As the snow and the ice weigh the trees down and they fall over, especially when there's an ice storm.
Oh, yeah, okay, I remember that part. It's about how do you know whether or not something has been manipulated by a biological being, a human being or an animal or anything like that, or it's just nature doing its thing. That's an interesting question. It's a foundational discussion when you come to something like property rights, I would say. I'm not too keen on the idea of how usually people express property rights because people express it like it's something that exists, but it doesn't. It's still an idea in your head, right? But how to identify whether or not you are trespassing onto other people's spheres is by identifying whether or not there are a human being or there's something in the vicinity or in nature, let's say, that seems to be manipulated by human beings. Then you might potentially be trespassing into some other people's territory, right? So there's some connection to property right there. That's a very important discussion, in my opinion. But something can clearly look like it's human made, right? You wouldn't if it's a tree stump that is cut exactly like this. It can't grow that way itself, so it must be made this way, and there's no sort of prior experience of anything happening that would lead to a thing like that, unless it was made by a human with a big chainsaw or something like that. So you're going to say, I'm going to take the chance that this was made this way. You don't know that because you didn't experience it. But anyone in their right mind wouldn't conclude anything else but that and act accordingly. So, but again, you need to distinguish when something is knowledge and when it isn't knowledge. It's just a conjecture. It's a pattern. You say this is a point in that is evidential in that direction.
So when you see a tree, it's splintered, right? A tree is never going to break perfectly flat, right?
Again, to get back to the title of the video is Concepts, a philosophical introduction, right? And morality, of course, but concepts first off. Now you're mentioning a tree. How did you know it's a tree? Are you just saying, okay, I experienced tree, therefore there must be tree, and I'm going to talk to you about how this tree should be considered and whatever? You are not talking about the subject you are proposing to be talking about, which are concepts and how they form and how to understand them, and maybe also, I would hope, how it leads to knowledge in the end, right? So it's kind of very disappointing.
And what I mean by that is, like, if you take a saw and you go through a tree, you're gonna sever it, and it's gonna have a completely flat tabletop, right? It's never going to happen in nature, because we understand that the way things break randomly in nature, they don't snap off with a perfect top, right? They'll just
that's right. That's absolutely right. That's very rational. That's rationality. That's your sort of personal subjective truth about what might have happened. Let's say it that way, right? But something that is man-made can actually look like it was naturally happening. You can break a tree using human beings, but it would look like nature did it by itself. So there's a problem there that, yes, when you can clearly see that it's humanly made, but you can't clearly see that things that look natural are not also human made.
Even be detached. So if you see a tree stump with a perfectly flat top, that's a human being, right? There's a human being there. Now, of course, people could say, well, but, it's the 1 in a billion jerks. They drive me crazy. Oh, man. Oh, they drive me crazy. It's the 1 in a billion people, right? And it would even be that, right? So you could say, well, theoretically, right? And I get the possibility, right? So theoretically, you could have a tree that would splinter and give you a flat tabletop. I mean, it could happen once in a billion universes, blah, 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 right? So when I say that it's impossible, I say, what I mean is, it's the quantum physics argument, right? Brownian motion could put all of the molecules of air at the top of the ceiling and leave nothing for you, and you could choke to death, but does that mean that you go into every room with scuba gear or...
That's not quantum physics. That is physical, that's physical chemistry of physics. That how molecules and atoms behave. Quantum physics is about the physical structure of the particles within atoms, right? So another little thing.
A giant snorkel. Of course not. Of course you don't do that, right? Although it could happen, right? In a room, if somebody...
But you don't know that. it's again, it's that you want to jump from, it is very, 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 very likely that this was made by humans. So I'm at that point, I'm going to decide I know that this was made by humans, but you can't do that because you didn't experience it. No matter how likely it is, it's not knowledge. It's still a theory or conjecture or hypothesis. And stay with that. Be content with that. You can't make that last jump, no matter how much you want to, because it's not possible from the definition of what knowledge is by your own standards.
Chokes to death because the air has just magically vanished from their end of the room, but your end of the room is fine. And they grab at their own throats, and they leave mottled marks on their throat, and then whatever, right? And then they choke to death, and then someone comes into the room, and there's somebody with finger marks on their neck who's choked to death. How many of us are going to say, well, it could be the case that all the oxygen vanished from their side of the room, and blah, blah, blah. There's proof beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And then there's never a defense called Brownian motion of air molecules means that there isn't going to be breathing available to that person on the other side of the room, although I'm fine, of course, right? That's just not. Or, it could be theoretically possible, of course, that if you need shelter, you're out in the woods, it could be theoretically possible that a windstorm would come along and assemble a perfect log cabin.
I'm going to jump a bit ahead here.
One in a million universes. So I don't really care about the improbability. So you got to watch out.
Probability has nothing to do with knowledge. It has absolutely freaking nothing to do with knowledge. Knowledge is whether or not you experience elephant, right? That can be knowledge. And the concept has nothing to do with the probability that something is going to be the case in the future. So why are you talking about this? Okay, I'm just skipping ahead a bit.
What happened was the priests lost a lot of power, and the aristocracy lost a lot of power, and a lot of giant, horrible messes. And
so now we are going into politics, and again, this soaking morality and moral judgments and moral thinking and moral whatever in sort of semi-political stuff and historical stuff, I'm a bit tired of it, because that's not really good philosophy. Philosophy is when you start from scratch, start from metaphysics and work your way up, as I was hoping this was going to be. But apparently that's more than his audience can handle, right? Even though he thinks it's a philosophical introduction, it's not really philosophical, is it?
And benefits came out of that. Technology advanced and morality was largely destroyed. So unfortunately, it's been a bit of a mixed bag, as we all know.
Okay, I need
so
to
in the realm of that, technology advanced.
What technology?
Away when the concepts through science in general get universalized, we can see that, or look at the aristocracy, right? The aristocracy relied upon a religious cosmology. When that religious cosmology was undermined and eventually destroyed, right? I mean, it's a sort of flat, earth-centered universe has been completely discredited. And as a result, religion lost a good deal of its power. As a result, the aristocracy that was propped up by religious commandments in that God
I don't know,
appointed the king.
I don't see why he needs to talk about all this. It's like I'm just going rambling on and, way ahead of concepts and morality, talking about how science destroyed Christian cosmology or whatever. I mean, it's on a completely different playing field than concepts and morality, in my opinion. Should be about when you're calling it a philosophical introduction. You're not calling it something else that is more like mainstream. It's a philosophical introduction. Then do the right work. Do it philosophically. You call yourself a philosopher, the greatest philosophy show, and you're so good at philosophy. Why don't you do it philosophically and rigidly and stepwise? And from this I can deduct this, and this is my assumption, or this is my axiom, and if you can disprove this axiom, well, the rest of what I'm saying is going to fall. No, that's not what you're doing. So it's not really a philosophical introduction. I'm getting a bit tired of this there's still like, about sort of 40 minutes left, and I don't think I can handle any more today. I'm getting close to 2 hours. So I hope it was provoked some thoughts about concepts and morality and my opinions about philosophy, these ideas or these aspects of philosophy, and my comments and critique of Stefan Molyneux' way of doing it is useful to you, and I hope to see you another time. So let's call it quits and have a nice day.